I built Keller Precision from one rented warehouse, two second-hand machines, and a promise I made to my father on the day he handed me his brass nameplate. 31 years later, my family sat in my own boardroom and voted me out while my brother Martin tapped that same brass nameplate with his pen like it was already trash. He smiled when the vote passed. My daughter, Elise, did not look at me. My son-in-law, Brent, leaned back in my chair and said, "Don't take it personally, Richard. You built it. But that doesn't mean you get to control it forever." Pause. That was their first mistake. Their second mistake was believing the company they had just stolen was the company I still owned. And their most expensive mistake was holding that vote 3 days after I had already signed the papers to sell it. My name is Richard Keller. I am 64 years old, born and raised in Dayton, Ohio. And for most of my adult life, Keller Precision was not just a company to me. It was the place where I spent my youth, buried my pride, raised my children, lost my wife, protected my employees, and turned my father's little tool shop into something people thought they could vote away with 4 signatures. The meeting was scheduled for 8 o'clock on a Thursday morning. I remember that because I arrived at 7:12, the way I had for most of my adult life. The front office still smelled like burnt coffee and machine oil. The night crew had left the lights low in the production hallway, and the old floor fans were humming near the loading bay. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then I saw the first sign that something was wrong. My office door was open. I never left my office door open, not because I was secretive, but because the room held 30 years of contracts, supplier histories, payroll notes, employee hardship files, and my father's nameplate from the original shop, Keller Tool and Die. The brass was worn at the edges because my father used to rub it with his thumb when he was thinking. That morning, the nameplate was not on my desk. It was sitting in the middle of the boardroom table, like an exhibit, like evidence, like a warning. Inside the boardroom, my brother Martin was sitting at the head of the table, my chair. He had one hand wrapped around my coffee mug, the blue one my late wife gave me after our first $1 million year. My daughter Elise sat 2 seats to his left, stiff and pale, avoiding my eyes. Brent sat beside her with his phone face up on the table, smiling like a man already rehearsing how he would tell people he had saved the family business. My younger sister, Paula, was there too. She looked nervous, but not guilty enough to leave. And at the far end of the table sat a woman I had never invited into my company, Tara Whitcomb, a restructuring consultant. At least, that was what her card said. But I knew exactly who she was. She had been having private lunches with Brent for 6 weeks. I walked in slowly. Nobody stood. That told me more than the agenda ever could. Martin tapped the brass nameplate again. Tap, tap, tap. "Morning, Richard," he said. "We started without you." I looked at the empty coffee mug in his hand, then at the nameplate, then at Brent sitting in my chair. "You moved my father's nameplate," I said. Brent laughed softly. "Come on, it's just a piece of metal." Elise closed her eyes. That small movement told me she knew he had gone too far. Martin leaned back and said, "We need to talk about transition." I did not sit down. I did not raise my voice. I only asked, "Whose transition?" Tara folded her hands. "Mr. Keller, the board has concerns about operational continuity, succession risk, and the emotional direction of leadership." That was a consultant's way of saying they thought I was old, tired, and in the way. I looked at Martin. "We don't have a board meeting scheduled." He smiled. "We do now." Then Paula slid a folder toward me. On the front was printed, "Special Board Resolution." I did not open it. I already knew what it said, not because anyone had warned me, because I had been waiting for them to become bold enough to put their betrayal on paper. Before I go any further, if you've ever watched someone mistake patience for weakness, hit the like button, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because this story is exactly why entitlement becomes dangerous when it gets too comfortable around things it did not build. Martin cleared his throat and began reading like he had been waiting years for the sound of his own authority. Due to concerns about strategic stagnation, delayed succession planning, and failure to adapt to changing market conditions, the voting members moved to remove Richard Keller as acting president of Keller Precision Holdings, effective immediately. He paused, expecting me to react. I did not. That bothered him. So he continued. Richard will remain in an advisory capacity for 90 days, subject to review. Brent gave a little smile. As a courtesy. There are moments when disrespect is not loud. Sometimes it is a man drinking from your mug while sitting beneath the picture of your dead wife. Sometimes it is your own daughter staring at a table instead of telling her husband to stop. Sometimes it is your brother tapping your father's nameplate, like he is counting down the seconds until your life's work becomes his inheritance. I looked at Elise. Is this what you want? She finally lifted her eyes. Dad, nobody is trying to hurt you. That sentence hurt more than the vote, because people only say that when they know they are hurting you. Brent leaned forward. We're trying to protect what's left before you turn it into a museum. Martin nodded. This company needs energy. Paula whispered. We all agreed it was time. All? I asked. Nobody answered. That was the first crack. Because Keller Precision had 5 voting members on paper. Me, Martin, Paula, Elise, and my son, Andrew. Andrew was not in the room. Andrew had worked the floor since he was 19. He knew the machines. He knew the employees. He knew every client by voice. He also knew I had been planning something. But he did not know everything. Where's Andrew? I asked. Martin's jaw moved slightly. He chose not to attend. That isn't what I asked. Brent sighed. Andrew gets emotional about these things. We didn't want drama. I looked at Elise again. You held a vote without your brother. She swallowed. Uncle Martin said his absence counted as abstention. That was when I finally opened the folder. The resolution had signatures. Martin, Paula, Elise, and one line marked, Andrew Keller, abstained by non-attendance. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny. Because they had just created the document my attorney had been waiting for. I closed the folder. Then I looked at Tara Whitcomb. Who let you into this building? She blinked. Excuse me. This is a secured facility. We produce aerospace components. Non-employees sign in. Brent waved a hand. I signed her in. On whose authority? He looked amused. On family. No, I said quietly. You are married to family. The room changed. Not much. Just enough. Brent's smile thinned. Martin said, This is exactly why we're doing this. You treat everyone like an outsider. I looked at him. Because some people are. Then I picked up my father's brass nameplate. For the first time that morning, Martin stopped tapping. I held it in my hand and felt the worn edge under my thumb. Then I put it inside my coat pocket. Brent laughed under his breath. Really? You're taking souvenirs now? I looked at him. That was not the part you should have touched. Nobody understood what I meant. Not yet. I walked out of the boardroom without arguing. Behind me, Martin said, Richard, don't make this uglier than it needs to be. I stopped at the door, turned around, and said, I'm not making anything ugly. Pause. I'm making it accurate. Then I went to my office, closed the door, and made one phone call. Not to scream at my lawyer. Not to beg for an injunction. Not to warn them. I called our corporate counsel, Denise Marlowe. She answered on the second ring. Richard, they held the vote. A pause. All 4. 3 signatures and 1 false abstention. Another pause. Then she said, Good. That one word would have confused anyone listening. But Denise knew exactly what it meant. For 8 months, I had been watching Keller Precision from a distance nobody in my family noticed. Not emotionally. Structurally. My brother Martin had spent years acting like the company was a family kingdom. He loved walking clients through the building and saying, We built this. But Martin never built anything. He joined after the company was already profitable. Paula handled community relations and charity events. Elise worked in marketing for 2 years before marrying Brent and moving into what she called brand strategy. Andrew was the only child who understood the business. And Brent understood access. He understood proximity. He understood that if he could convince Elise that I was outdated and Martin that he was undervalued, he could stand in the middle and look like the future. The first clue came in January. A vendor called me personally to ask why Brent was requesting copies of supply agreements. Brent had no authority over supply agreements. When I asked him about it, he smiled and said, "Just trying to understand the business better." The second clue came 3 weeks later. Our bank relationship manager forwarded me an email by mistake. It was from Martin. He was asking whether Keller Precision could open a new operating line, pending leadership transition. The phrase was too polished for Martin. That was Brent's language. The third clue came from my assistant, Maria. She had worked for me 22 years and knew when something smelled wrong before a document ever proved it. She knocked on my door one afternoon and said, "Mr. Keller, why is Mr. Whitcomb asking IT for admin access to the executive drive?" I asked when. She said, "Yesterday, after you left for the supplier dinner." I did not confront Brent. I called Denise. Then I called a mergers and acquisitions attorney in Chicago named Victor Chun. Then I did something my family never imagined I would do. I started preparing Keller Precision for sale. Not the name, not the family story, the real company, the profitable contracts, the patents, the machines, the tooling assets, the long-term aerospace supply agreements, the part that made money. Years earlier, after a lawsuit almost destroyed one of our competitors, Denise convinced me to separate the company into different entities. Keller Precision Holdings owned the family shares and the name. Keller Operating Company owned the equipment, patents, contracts, and revenue. The family had voting rights in the holding company. I controlled the operating company through a separate trust created after my wife died. At the time, everyone complained the structure was too complicated. Martin said it was unnecessary. Paula called it paranoid. Elise never read the documents. Brent did not know they existed. That was the difference between inheriting a story and understanding a business. They had just voted me out of the company name on the wall. But 3 days earlier, I had signed an asset purchase agreement selling Keller Operating Company to Barrington Industrial Group for $48.6 million. The deal protected every employee for 18 months. It kept Andrew as plant director. It paid all outstanding vendor accounts. It preserved the pension obligations. And it transferred the real assets out from under the holding company before my family could use them as chips in their little power game. The vote they held on Thursday morning did not remove me from power. It proved why I had been right to move it. At 10:15 that morning, while Martin was probably practicing his first speech as president, Denise arrived at the building. She did not come through the front entrance. She came through receiving. That was important, because the access logs would later show she entered after the vote, not before. We sat in my office. I placed the signed resolution on the desk. Denise read it once. Then she removed her glasses and said, "They documented the breach themselves." Andrew wasn't notified. No, Tara Whitcomb had access. Yes, Brent signed her in. Denise looked at me. That helps. I almost laughed. It was strange how betrayal could turn into paperwork so quickly. At 11:03, Maria knocked and said Martin wanted me in the boardroom. I told her to send him to my office instead. She hesitated. He said he is president now. I looked at Denise. She raised one eyebrow. Then I told Maria, "Tell him presidents can walk down hallways." 3 minutes later, Martin opened my door without knocking. That was the old Martin, the boy who always borrowed my tools and returned them broken, the man who always wanted credit without responsibility. He stepped inside, saw Denise, and froze. "Why is legal here?" Denise smiled politely. "Good morning, Martin. He looked at me. I thought we agreed this would be handled internally. We didn't agree to anything, I said. You're making this adversarial. No. You held a removal vote without proper notice and allowed an unauthorized consultant into secured company files. His face reddened. Tara is advising us. Us. The board. Denise opened her folder. There's no valid board action without proper notice to all voting members, including Andrew Keller. And even if there were, the resolution applies only to Keller Precision Holdings. Martin blinked. That's the company. I said nothing. Denise let the silence do its work. Martin looked from her to me. What does that mean? It means, Denise said calmly, you may have voted on the wrong thing. That was the first micro payoff. Not dramatic, not loud, just a man realizing the chair he had taken might not be connected to the floor. Martin forced a laugh. This is nonsense. The building says Keller Precision. I nodded. It does. The clients know Keller Precision. They do. The employees work for Keller Precision. Denise corrected him. The employees work for Keller Operating Company. Martin stared at her. There it was. The first real fear. Not enough to humble him. Just enough to make him angry. He pointed at me. You planned this. No, I said. You revealed why it was necessary. Martin left my office without another word, but he did not go to apologize. He went to Brent, and Brent did what arrogant men do when their first plan cracks. He pushed harder. At 12:40, every department manager received an email from Martin's account. Subject line, Leadership Transition Update. It announced that I had stepped back, that Martin would serve as interim president, and that Brent Whitcomb would lead a strategic modernization review. Brent had added himself to the company's future in one sentence. He also made one mistake. He copied the wrong distribution list. The email went to Barrington Industrial Group's integration team. At 12:43, Victor Chin forwarded it to Denise with only 3 words. Please preserve this. By 1 o'clock, the violation was no longer emotional. It was documented. That was the second micro payoff. I did not reply to the email. I did not send an angry correction. I walked to the production floor. The machines were running. The men and women who had built that company with me were doing what they had always done, measuring, cutting, checking, fixing, keeping promises my family was already trying to monetize. Near CNC Bay 3, Andrew was standing with a clipboard. He saw my face and knew. They did it. Yes. His eyes dropped. Elise signed. Yes. He wiped his hand over his mouth. I told her Brent was using her. I know. Dad, I didn't know the vote was today. I swear. I know that too. He looked surprised. I handed him a copy of the resolution. His jaw tightened when he saw the abstention line. They used my name. They used your absence. That's fraud. It's evidence. He looked toward the front offices. What do you want me to do? Nothing emotional. He nodded. That was why I trusted Andrew. He had anger, but he did not worship it. I said, keep the floor calm. If anyone asks, tell them payroll is safe, jobs are safe, and nobody should take instructions from Brent. Andrew almost smiled. That last part is going to be easy. Before I left, he asked, what about Elise? There it was. The part nobody in revenge stories wants to admit. Sometimes the people who hurt you are also the people you still want to protect from the consequences they invited. I love my daughter. Even that morning, even after her signature sat on a page meant to remove me from the company I built. But love is not the same as access. I'm going to protect her from Brent, I said. Andrew looked at me, and from herself. I did not answer right away. Then I said, as much as she lets me. That afternoon, I changed the locks. Not on the building, on my office, on the executive file room, on the server archive, on the cabinet that held original supplier agreements, and on the small private drawer where my father's first contracts were still stored. Martin found out when his key card denied him at 4:18. I know the exact time because security sent me the access report. He tried once, then again, then 5 times in a row. Then Brent tried his card. Denied. Then Tara Whitcomb tried a temporary visitor badge. Denied. Maria later told me she heard Brent say, "He can't do this." And Martin answered, "He just did." That was the third micro payoff. They had voted me out in the morning. By sunset, they could no longer open the doors that mattered. But the real twist came that night. At 8:36, Elise called me. I was sitting in my truck outside the plant, watching the last shift leave. I had not gone home because I knew if I sat alone in my kitchen, I would start remembering her as a little girl running through that same factory with pink headphones on, pretending the machines were dragons. I answered. For 3 seconds, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "Dad, Brent says you're trying to destroy the company." Then she removed her glasses and said, "They documented the breach themselves." Andrew wasn't notified. No, Tara Whitcomb had access. Yes, Brent signed her in. Denise looked at me. That helps. I almost laughed. It was strange how betrayal could turn into paperwork so quickly. At 11:03, Maria knocked and said Martin wanted me in the boardroom. I told her to send him to my office instead. She hesitated. He said he is president now. I looked at Denise. She raised one eyebrow. Then I told Maria, "Tell him presidents can walk down hallways." 3 minutes later, Martin opened my door without knocking. That was the old Martin, the boy who always borrowed my tools and returned them broken, the man who always wanted credit without responsibility. He stepped inside, saw Denise, and froze. "Why is legal here?" Denise smiled politely. "Good morning, Martin." He looked at me. "I thought we agreed this would be handled internally." "We didn't agree to anything," I said. "You're making this adversarial." "No. You held a removal vote without proper notice and allowed an unauthorized consultant into secured company files." His face reddened. "Tara is advising us." "Us?" "The board." Denise opened her folder. "There's no valid board action without proper notice to all voting members, including Andrew Keller. And even if there were, the resolution applies only to Keller Precision Holdings." Martin blinked. "That's the company." I said nothing. Denise let the silence do its work. Martin looked from her to me. "What does that mean?" "It means," Denise said calmly, "you may have voted on the wrong thing." That was the first micro payoff. Not dramatic, not loud, just a man realizing the chair he had taken might not be connected to the floor. Martin forced a laugh. "This is nonsense. The building says Keller Precision." I nodded. "It does. The clients know Keller Precision." "They do. The employees work for Keller Precision." Denise corrected him. "The employees work for Keller Operating Company." Martin stared at her. There it was. The first real fear. Not enough to humble him. Just enough to make him angry. He pointed at me. "You planned this." "No," I said. "You revealed why it was necessary." Martin left my office without another word, but he did not go to apologize. He went to Brent, and Brent did what arrogant men do when their first plan cracks. He pushed harder. At 12:40, every department manager received an email from Martin's account. Subject line, "Leadership Transition Update." It announced that I had stepped back, that Martin would serve as interim president, and that Brent Whitcomb would lead a strategic modernization review. Brent had added himself to the company's future in one sentence. He also made one mistake. He copied the wrong distribution list. The email went to Barrington Industrial Group's integration team. At 12:43, Victor Chin forwarded it to Denise with only 3 words. "Please preserve this." By 1 o'clock, the violation was no longer emotional. It was documented. That was the second micro payoff. I did not reply to the email. I did not send an angry correction. I walked to the production floor. The machines were running. The men and women who had built that company with me were doing what they had always done: measuring, cutting, checking, fixing, keeping promises my family was already trying to monetize. Near CNC Bay 3, Andrew was standing with a clipboard. He saw my face and knew. They did it. Yes. His eyes dropped. Elise signed. Yes. He wiped his hand over his mouth. I told her Brent was using her. I know. Dad, I didn't know the vote was today. I swear. I know that too. He looked surprised. I handed him a copy of the resolution. His jaw tightened when he saw the abstention line. They used my name. They used your absence. That's fraud. It's evidence. He looked toward the front offices. What do you want me to do? Nothing emotional. He nodded. That was why I trusted Andrew. He had anger, but he did not worship it. I said, keep the floor calm. If anyone asks, tell them payroll is safe, jobs are safe, and nobody should take instructions from Brent. Andrew almost smiled. That last part is going to be easy. Before I left, he asked, what about Elise? There it was. The part nobody in revenge stories wants to admit. Sometimes the people who hurt you are also the people you still want to protect from the consequences they invited. I love my daughter. Even that morning, even after her signature sat on a page meant to remove me from the company I built. But love is not the same as access. I'm going to protect her from Brent, I said. Andrew looked at me. And from herself. I did not answer right away. Then I said, as much as she lets me. That afternoon, I changed the locks. Not on the building, on my office, on the executive file room, on the server archive, on the cabinet that held original supplier agreements, and on the small private drawer where my father's first contracts were still stored. Martin found out when his key card denied him at 4:18. I know the exact time because security sent me the access report. He tried once, then again, then 5 times in a row. Then Brent tried his card, denied. Then Tara Whitcomb tried a temporary visitor badge, denied. Maria later told me she heard Brent say, he can't do this. And Martin answered, he just did. That was the 3rd micro payoff. They had voted me out in the morning. By sunset, they could no longer open the doors that mattered. But the real twist came that night. At 8:36, Elise called me. I was sitting in my truck outside the plant, watching the last shift leave. I had not gone home because I knew if I sat alone in my kitchen, I would start remembering her as a little girl running through that same factory with pink headphones on, pretending the machines were dragons. I answered. For 3 seconds, she said nothing. Then she whispered, Dad, Brent says you're trying to destroy the company. No, I said. Brent is trying to find out why he can't touch it. She exhaled shakily. Did you really lock him out? Yes. He's furious. I know. Uncle Martin says you're punishing everyone. No. I'm protecting everyone from people who thought ownership was a family rumor. She went quiet. Then she said the line that stayed with me longer than the vote. Dad, you never made me feel like I had a place there. I closed my eyes. That one hurt, because it had truth in it. Not the whole truth, but enough. Elise had always wanted the company to feel like a family legacy. I had wanted it to survive. Those are not always the same thing. I gave you a place, I said softly. You brought someone who wanted a throne. She started crying, but quietly. Then Brent's voice appeared in the background. Ask him if he sold something. My eyes opened. I did not speak. Elise covered the phone, but not well enough. I heard Brent say, Tara found unusual diligence traffic. He's hiding a transaction. That was how I knew. They had accessed the data room. Not successfully, but enough to see movement. Elise came back on the line. Dad, did you sell the company? I looked through the windshield at the building that had taken my youth, my weekends, my marriage vacations, my knees, my sleep, and nearly my relationship with my children. Then I said, ask Brent why he was looking. She hung up. If you've made it this far, Tell me something in the comments. Would you have confronted them in that boardroom, or stayed quiet and let the documents expose them? And if these calm revenge stories keep you listening, subscribe. Because from here, the family didn't just lose control. They started losing the story they were telling themselves. The next morning, Brent made his move. He sent a letter to Barrington Industrial Group. Not through counsel, not through the board, through his personal email. The subject line was, "Notice of Disputed Authority." In it, he claimed that I had entered into negotiations without proper approval, that Keller Precision Holdings disputed any sale of assets, and that all pending transactions should be paused until the new leadership team reviewed them. He signed it, Brent Whitcomb, Strategic Transition Lead, Keller Precision Holdings. He had given himself a title. That was not the funny part. The funny part was that he sent it to a company that had already closed the transaction. Barrington forwarded the letter to Victor Chun. Victor forwarded it to Denise. Denise forwarded it to me. I printed one copy and placed it in a folder labeled Brent, not because I was petty, because lawsuits are built with labels. At 10 o'clock, Denise sent Brent a cease and desist. Simple language. No threats. No drama. It stated that Brent was not an officer, director, employee, or authorized representative of Keller Operating Company. It instructed him to stop contacting buyers, vendors, employees, or financial partners. It warned that any further interference with the completed sale could expose him personally to damages. Personally. That word changed everything. Because entitled people love taking risks with other people's property. They become much quieter when their own name appears near the bill. At 10:27, Brent called me 6 times. I did not answer. At 10:41, Martin called. I did not answer. At 11:15, Paula sent a text. "Richard, this has gone too far. We are family. Please don't let lawyers ruin everything." I looked at the message for a long time. Then I typed back, "Lawyers did not move Dad's nameplate." She did not reply. That afternoon, I went back into the boardroom for the first time since the vote. It was empty. Martin's coffee cup was gone. The folder was gone. But the small scratches from the brass nameplate were still visible in the polished table. I stood there with the nameplate in my hand. For a few minutes, I was not angry. I was just tired. Not the tired that comes from work. The tired that comes from realizing people can spend years standing beside your sacrifice and still mistake it for opportunity. I thought about my father. He never built anything big. Just a small tool shop behind a tire store. But he had one rule. Never leave the keys with people who only love the building after it gets warm. I used to think that was too harsh. That day I understood it. I placed the brass nameplate back on the table. Not where Martin had put it. In front of my chair. Then I took a picture. A simple picture. Nameplate. Chair. Empty room. It became the image I sent to Andrew later with one message. Remember what they touched first. Because in the end, the nameplate was not about metal. It was about permission. And they had assumed permission from a man they were trying to erase. 6 weeks passed. On the surface, things became quiet. That is what they saw. They saw me stop attending the office every day. They saw Barrington's integration team arrive with polite smiles and new badges. They saw Andrew promoted to general manager of plant operations. They saw employees remain calm because payroll never missed and benefits never changed. They saw Martin still walking around with a title from Keller Precision Holdings that sounded important on paper. Interim president, 2 to lenders, 1 to Barrington, 1 to a local business journal, and 2 to potential buyers Tara Whitcomb had apparently contacted before the sale closed. That was the betrayal layer I had not expected. Brent had not only planned to take control, he had planned to flip the company. He wanted to use my family's vote to push me out, create panic, bring in terror, position himself as the man who saved the business, and then sell it to a lower bidder who had promised him a consulting role after closing. It was not leadership. It was a staged takeover. And Elise had signed the paper that made it look legitimate. When Denise showed me the email chain, I felt something colder than anger. Brent had written to Tara, "Once Richard is out, Elise can manage family optics. Martin wants the title. Paula wants distributions. None of them understand the asset structure yet. None of them understand the asset structure yet." That sentence did two things. It proved Brent knew he was manipulating my family, and it proved he knew there was something he did not understand. He just assumed he would understand it before it mattered. He was wrong. The fourth micro payoff came at a family dinner I did not attend. Paula hosted at her house on a Sunday. I know what happened because Andrew went, not for the food, for Elise. He told me later that Martin arrived with folders, still insisting he could reverse the sale. Brent paced the living room talking about emergency injunctions and fiduciary violations. Paula cried because the quarterly distributions from Keller Operating Company had stopped. That was the first time she realized the family holding company no longer had operating profit flowing into it. The name remained. The cash engine was gone. Martin said, "Richard can't just cut us off." Andrew corrected him. "He didn't cut you off. You voted yourself into a shell." Brent snapped, "Stay out of this. You're just an employee now." Andrew stood up. "No, I'm the employee Barrington chose to keep. You're the husband of someone who signed something she didn't read." Elise started crying. Brent told her, "Don't let them turn you against me." And that was when Andrew said the one thing I wish I had been there to hear. He already did that himself. After that dinner, Elise came to my house alone. It was raining. Not dramatic rain. Just steady rain tapping against the porch roof, like it had nowhere else to go. She stood at my door holding a folder against her chest. For a second, she looked 20 again. Scared. Proud. Too stubborn to apologize quickly. I opened the door and let her in. She walked into the kitchen, but did not sit. Her eyes went to the framed photo of her mother near the window. Then she whispered, "Did Mom know about the trust?" "Yes." "Was it her idea?" "Partly." That hurt her. I could see it. Not because the trust existed. Because her mother had understood something about the family that Elise had refused to see. She placed a folder on my kitchen table. Inside were printed emails. Brent's emails. Messages between him and Tara. Messages to Martin. Messages to a private lender. And one message to Elise that said, "Your father needs to be made small before he gives anything willingly." I read that sentence twice. Made small. That was what the vote had been. Not a business decision. A humiliation ritual. Elise wiped her face. I thought he wanted me to have a voice. I looked at my daughter. "No, he wanted your signature." She nodded, but it broke something in her. Not loudly. Just enough. Then she said, "I'm sorry." There are apologies people give because they got caught. And then there are apologies that sound like someone finally seeing the room they helped set on fire. Elise's apology was the second kind. But sorry does not undo signatures. "I love you," I said. She started crying harder. "But you can't have voting access again." She looked up. That was the line she did not expect. "I'll divorce him," she said. "That is your marriage." "I'll testify." "That is your choice." "I'll do anything." I shook my head. "No, that's the problem. You did anything when the wrong man asked. Now you need to learn the difference between love and authority." She covered her mouth. I did not hug her immediately. That may sound cruel, but it was not. A parent who rescues an adult child from every consequence teaches them that regret is enough. Regret was not enough anymore. After a moment, I walked around the table and put my arms around her. She cried into my shoulder the way she had not done since her mother died, and I held her. But I did not give her the company back. That was the difference. Love stayed. Control did not. The final meeting happened 8 days later. Not in my old boardroom. That room belonged to Barrington now. It happened at the office of Marlowe and Pierce, Denise's firm, in a conference room with glass walls and no family photos. That mattered. Family had been used as a weapon too many times. This meeting needed clean tables and signed documents. Martin arrived first. He wore a navy suit that looked new. Paula came next, carrying tissues. Elise arrived alone. No Brent. That was the first sign. He understood something had changed. Then he walked in 10 minutes late with Tara Whitcomb. Denise looked up and said, "Ms. Whitcomb is not invited." Tara smiled professionally. "I'm here as an advisor." Denise closed her folder. "To whom?" Brent said. "To the leadership team." Denise looked around the room. "There's no leadership team here that includes you." Brent laughed once. "I think that's exactly what we're here to discuss." Victorchin sat beside Denise. He had said almost nothing since I met him. That day, he placed one document in the center of the table. Not a stack. One document. The asset purchase closing statement. Brent's eyes dropped to the date. 3 days before the vote. His face changed. Not a lot, but enough. Martin leaned forward. "What is that?" Victor said. "The sale." Paula whispered. "Sale of what?" I answered that one. "The operating company." Martin shook his head. "No, we voted before you could do that." Denise slid the resolution beside the closing statement. "No, you voted after he had already done it." Brent's mouth tightened. That sale required approval. Victor shook his head. "Not from Keller Precision Holdings." The operating assets were held under the Keller Family Industrial Trust, with Richard Keller as controlling trustee. The trust documents allowed sale upon 3 conditions: employee protection, debt satisfaction, and fair market valuation. All 3 were met. Martin looked at me. "You hid this." I structured it. "You stole from the family." That was the first time my voice sharpened. "No, Martin. I stopped the family from stealing from the employees." Silence. That sentence landed where it needed to land, because everyone in that room knew Martin had not once mentioned the workers. Not payroll, not pensions, not health insurance, not the men and women whose mortgages depended on the company. Only control, only distributions, only titles. Paula started crying. "So what do we have?" Denise answered gently. "Keller Precision Holdings still exists. It owns the historical name, certain trademarks not included in the operating sale, and passive assets listed in Schedule C." Martin said, "How much income?" Victor said, "Minimal." Brent leaned back, trying to recover. "This is bad faith. Richard intentionally undermined the board." Denise opened a second folder. "Before we discuss bad faith, we should review your communications." Brent stopped moving. There's a special kind of fear that appears when arrogant people realize emails are not thoughts. They are records. Denise read only 3 lines. Not all of them. She did not need to. Once Richard is out, Elise can manage family optics. She turned a page. Martin wants the title. Paula wants distributions. Another page. None of them understand the asset structure yet. Martin turned slowly toward Brent. "What does that mean?" Brent said nothing. Paula stared at him like she had never seen his face clearly before. Elise looked down at the table. Not shocked. Finished. Denise continued. "Mr. Whitcomb also contacted Barrington Industrial Group after closing, falsely presenting himself as strategic transition lead. He contacted vendors. He contacted lenders. He contacted alternate buyers through Ms. Whitcomb. These actions may expose him to claims for tortious interference." Brent finally spoke. "This is intimidation." Victor said no. "This is notice." Then Denise slid one more document forward. A settlement proposal. It required Brent to cease all contact with Barrington, Keller vendors, Keller employees, and any party connected to the sale. It required Tara Whitcomb to certify destruction of any confidential materials. It required Martin and Paula to resign from any claimed operational roles. It required Elise to surrender voting rights into a non-controlling family trust if she wanted to remain a passive beneficiary. and it required everyone to acknowledge that the sale was valid, closed, and not subject to family reversal. Martin shoved the paper back. I'm not signing that. I looked at him. You don't have to. He blinked. That was the fifth micro-payoff. The moment he realized the document was not asking permission. It was offering mercy. Denise said, "If you decline, we file for declaratory judgment, seek damages for interference, and submit Mr. Wickham's communications as evidence. Barrington has already agreed to cooperate." Paula whispered, "Damages?" Victor nodded. "The buyer can show disruption costs." Brent laughed again, but this time there was no confidence in it. "You're going to sue your own family?" I looked at him. "No, I'm going to stop you from using them as cover." Elise looked at me then. Her eyes were red, but for the first time, she did not look away. Brent turned to her. "Say something," she said. "I already did." He frowned. "What does that mean?" She reached into her purse and placed her wedding ring on the table. No drama, no speech, just a small circle of metal landing beside a stack of consequences. Brent stared at it. "Elise." She shook her head. "You told me he wanted to erase me." Brent swallowed. "He did." "No," she said. "You wanted to use me before I understood what I was signing." Martin looked sick. Paula covered her face. Tara Whitcomb gathered her papers. Denise stopped her. "Those stay here." Tara froze, then slowly placed the folder back on the table. That was the public consequence. Not a courtroom. Not police. Not screaming. Just a room full of people watching the future they planned shrink into signatures they could not escape. Martin signed first. His hand shook. Paula signed next. She cried while she did it. Elise signed after reading every line. That mattered to me. She read every line. Brent refused for 12 minutes. He argued. He accused. He threatened to expose me. Then Victor quietly mentioned the lender emails. Brent signed. Tara signed the certification. When it was done, Denise collected the papers and placed them in a blue legal folder, the same color as the coffee mug Martin had used that morning. I did not plan that, but I noticed it. After everyone left, Martin stayed behind. For the first time in years, he looked like my younger brother instead of a man trying to wear my shadow. He stood near the door and said, "Dad would be ashamed of this." I put my hand in my coat pocket and took out the brass nameplate. Then I placed it on the conference table between us. "No," I said. "Dad would ask why you touched his name before you understood what it cost." Martin's face twisted. "You always thought you were better than us." "No, I always knew the business was more fragile than your ego allowed you to see." He looked down. "What am I supposed to do now?" That question almost softened me. Almost. But then I remembered him sitting in my chair, tapping that nameplate, smiling while my daughter signed away loyalty she did not understand. "You still have the family name," I said. He gave a bitter laugh. "That's nothing." I picked up the nameplate. "That's what you voted for." He had no answer. 2 months later, Keller Precision's old building had a new sign near the entrance. Barrington Keller Manufacturing. They kept the Keller name because the clients trusted it. Andrew ran the floor better than I ever did at his age. The employees received their bonuses before Christmas. Maria retired with a check big enough to take her sister to Italy, something she had talked about for 15 years. Paula stopped calling for a while. Then one afternoon, she sent a handwritten apology. Not perfect, but real enough that I kept it. Martin moved to Arizona. His business cards became useless before the ink had fully dried. Brent and Elise divorced quietly. He tried consulting for 2 companies in the region, but word travels fast in manufacturing towns. Not gossip. Records. People can forgive ambition. They do not trust interference. Elise rebuilt her relationship with Andrew first, then with me. Slowly, carefully, without asking for control. That was how I knew she was changing. One Sunday, she came to lunch and saw the brass nameplate on my bookshelf. Not in the office, Not in the company. At home. She touched the edge of it and said, I hated that thing for years. I asked why. She said, because I thought it mattered more than us. I looked at the nameplate, then at my daughter. It never mattered more than you. Her eyes filled, but it protected what people like Brent would have taken from all of you. She nodded. I understand that now. And maybe that was the only part of the company I was able to save inside my family. Not the building, not the title, not the shares. Understanding. If this story kept you listening until the end, hit the like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments whether I went too far, or whether protecting what you built is the only way to stop people from spending a future that was never theirs. Because sometimes family does not need more access. Sometimes family needs a locked door and a document they should have read sooner. A year after the vote, Barrington held an employee anniversary event. They invited me. I almost did not go, but Andrew asked me to. So I wore the same dark suit I had worn in that final meeting, and I walked through the plant slowly. The machines sounded the same. The floor smelled the same, but the weight was different. I no longer carried the fear that one family argument could destroy 3 decades of work. Near the old boardroom, I stopped. The door was open. Inside, the table had been replaced. The chairs were different. My old chair was gone. For some reason, that made me smile. Andrew stood beside me and asked, "You okay?" I said yes. He looked into the room. "Do you miss it?" I thought about that. I miss parts of it. The early mornings, the first big contract, the look on my wife's face when we survived the recession, my father's hands on that brass nameplate. But I did not miss being surrounded by people who loved the harvest more than the field. No, I said. I'm proud it survived me. Andrew smiled. Then we walked back toward the floor. As we passed the front lobby, I saw Martin's old interim president business card sitting inside a small display case someone had made as a joke. Andrew had labeled it, "Shortest administration in company history." I laughed for the first time in months. Not cruelly, just honestly. Because sometimes the punishment is not destruction. Sometimes the punishment is being remembered accurately. They voted me out of a company they thought they owned. But by the time they touched my father's nameplate, the real company was already gone. Some doors do not slam shut. Some close quietly, legally, and forever.